Week 3, Part 2, 3.2, Exploring Arguments. Locating contextual information about USF and funding provided us with a general understanding of the topic. Outlining dueling conclusions on state disinvestment to identify positions, claims, and evidence allowed us to see how these three elements of an argument work together. Now we are ready to explore some of the options and perspectives around our question and examine how different information is used as evidence in support of or in opposition to decreasing funding for USF. We might have recognized some opinions, claims, or arguments when we were searching for articles on context, but we were not reading in search of arguments related to funding in higher education, which is now our goal. Identifying a position and its supporting claims and evidence helps us understand an argument. We also want to evaluate how claims and evidence function within the article and to think about how they will function in our paper and presentation in support of our position. The takeaway will be an expanded understanding of the perspectives and positions related to our topic and an opportunity to practice identifying and evaluating evidence. We will also isolate pieces of relevant information that can be combined with other pieces of information to serve as evidence in support of claims related to our position. As we continue to gather information, we are beginning to categorize source material and align it with the categories and clusters in order to arrange it for our presentation. This image shows a Venn diagram with general information. It also shows within that potential context and potential evidence. And within each of those overlapping circles, there's different evidence if it's potential evidence, or relevant background and context if it's potential context. Reading arguments. To expand your search beyond reading for informative context, you will look at and for articles that engage in a debate instead of simply providing information. Some articles might show multiple sides of a debate as part of informing readers, but persuasive articles actually take a side and support a position. We are still learning about the broad topic, and locating some of the existing debates on the topic is an important part of expanding our understanding. But now you will also want to think about the position you and your team need to support so that you can look at existing positions and locate general information that can serve as evidence in support of your position. When you are researching and reading, sometimes you are looking for a specific statement or statistic to serve as evidence in support of a specific claim. But more often you are reading arguments in general and noting valuable information, some of which you will use as evidence, some of which you will use as context, and some of it which you will not use in the presentation or paper. If you already noted some relevant information in any of your context readings that has potential to serve as evidence for your position, revisiting those articles might be a good place to start. To search for new sources that might have relevant information, you will want to use what you know about the topic and position and work with your team members to compile diverse and useful material from a range of sources. When you read articles and read titles and skim articles, look for concrete claims that make a statement on the topic and then look for evidence being used to support the statement. Pay attention to how evidence, like statistics and other uses of quantitative data, instead of or in addition to qualitative, is employed in conjunction with the claim to serve as evidence in support of a position. Some articles will directly engage our question and offer relevant information or even state and support a position. More articles will likely talk about our topic as part of a larger conversation, so you'll be able to identify useful points of information that can serve as evidence in support of a claim. Other resources will not directly address our topic, but can serve as support evidence that can be connected to a claim, like the USF budget. Your team should already have a few emerging categories or claims that you can search for specific evidence to support. The goal of your research is not to locate complete arguments that support your position and drop them into your presentation and paper as is, but to identify evidence and use it to develop claims and then explain the connections between your evidence and claims and between your claims and the position with clear reasoning. You and your team are constructing an argument in support of your position by establishing claims and locating evidence in support of them. You may find claims that already exist, and you can use those with some expansion and modification, but you will bring multiple pieces of evidence together to support the claim instead of simply offering the existing evidence already used to support the claim in an existing argument and article. Or you may develop a new claim by synthesizing or collecting evidence. The evidence is what you need to find and integrate, but creating an overall argument instead of simply locating and citing existing claims already connected to evidence is the real work, or constructing a strong and original argument. In effect, the three claims your team presents should be creative synthesis of the evidence being used to support a larger claim. By identifying the claims and evidence in an argument, we already started to dissect it. So the next step is to look at each piece of information individually, which is analysis. As we know, questioning each piece often requires context, which helps us understand the piece, but applying techniques defined by theories, methods, and lenses will move us fully into analysis and prepare us for evaluation. Not unlike our discussion on argument, there are many approaches to analyzing an argument, and a variety of methods are used across fields and disciplines. Approaches also vary according to the argument. For instance, analyzing a visual argument uses some of the same techniques as reading a textual argument or hearing an oral argument, but each has distinct elements that require individual terms and techniques. Approaches used to deconstruct arguments can also inform the construction of arguments. So we will explore a few approaches to dissecting and analyzing arguments as we prepare to construct our claims. Investigating arguments. In the strictest sense, evaluating an argument that you have analyzed is used to determine whether the argument is valid or not, but concepts like validity and reliability have specific meanings and standards, and our practical goal is to consider whether or not the argument is convincing for our audience. An argument may not be valid, but it might still convince the audience, and a sound, reasonable argument might not convince some or all members of an audience. Of course, there are debates about whether the goal of an argument is to look for truth or to convince an audience or any other number of options, but those aren't our debates to consider. We want to make the foundational assumption that our audience consists of a wide variety of people who are open to listening and learning, and who respond to a variety of reasonable reasons to support a position that is built upon clear claims and strong evidence. We also know that reasoning used to connect evidence to claims and claims to a position has to be sound for any argument to be solid. If it is not, it will not withstand the scrutiny of analysis, because dissecting the claims and evidence will reveal weak content and/or connections. Our goal is to state and support a position that answers the question of whether funding for USF should be decreased. To do this, we will need to locate sources and read them closely, carefully, and critically so that we can extract information to serve as evidence to support claims that support our position. Once we have identified some main points of evidence and comprehend them in context, we will think about their strengths and why and how and where they fit within the goal of determining which evidence is the strongest fit for our position and audience. Ultimately, we want to understand the evidence we are considering so that we can situate it within our overall argument and use it to support our position. Because we are navigating and negotiating the arguments that surround us regularly, we already have many of the skills required to identify a position and the supporting claims and evidence. Some of those skills come from natural skepticism, and some have been honed by education and engagement with arguments. Applying those skills in academic settings is necessary for success, and as you progress into upper-level coursework and beyond the university, you will benefit from practicing advanced critical thinking approaches that include application of critical theories, methods, or lenses. The distinct disciplines use specific methods and are informed by disciplinary theories and theorists. But there are some general approaches that apply to understanding arguments and start to move our thinking towards analysis and evaluation. Let's recall building conclusions on state disinvestment in order to remember the specific terms and how we are using them when we move from broad conversations into specific assignments. The broad topic is state funding for higher education, and the more specific topic is the vacillating financial investment of states in public institutions of higher education. The debate is framed by the question of whether or not states have made cuts to funding for higher education. The larger question is the impact of the cuts to higher education, but that debate assumes cuts have been made, so this question questions the question. The two positions are: states have made deep cuts to funding for higher education, states have not made deep cuts to funding for higher education. Each position is supported by claims. Major points are made in support of the position. Claims are supported with evidence. Direct material is offered in support of the claim, ideally with an explanation of the evidence and of the reasoning that connects the evidence to the claim. Terms you will need to understand and practice at this point are position, claims, and evidence. These will move into your group presentation and your position papers in response to the questions: should the state of Florida decrease funding for the University of South Florida? To start with the simplest positions, this is a yes or no question. So the broad position should be: yes, the state of Florida should decrease funding for USF. Or no, the state of Florida should not decrease funding for USF. Those are the main positions that directly respond to our question. Each position should be supported by claims that argue for the position, by evidence that supports and explains the claims, and by clear reasons and explanations that connect the evidence to the claims and the claims to the position. To find evidence, each team member will locate articles and read them closely and carefully in search of information that can serve as evidence connected to the position of the team. In the initial phase of research, we were more interested in breadth than depth because we were trying to zoom out and develop a big picture understanding of the topic. Now we are ready to look for specific pieces of information to connect to claims that support our position. Stay open to learning about the broad conversation and expanding your ideas and understanding, but your searches should be honed in specific directions. If you encounter an article that actually states your position and offers claims and evidence in support, it can serve as an example of the kind of argument you and your team will construct, and you can practice deconstructing the position and dissecting the claims and evidence. When you encounter your position supported by evidence, some simple questions can help you consider its strength. Is a position clearly stated early and supported by claims throughout? Is evidence provided for the claims? Is the evidence supported with sources or based on assumptions? Are credible sources cited? What evidence is provided for oppositional or alternative perspectives? Are claims in opposition to the position acknowledged and refuted? Are counterclaims identified and dismantled? What are other alternative explanations or positions? Asking questions to determine the value of the material is useful when examining any articles in search of evidence and claims in general and in support of your position. And knowing that your audience will ask similar questions of your presentations and papers will help you construct with deconstruction in mind. Many of those questions simply clarify that the evidence is strong and credible, which is the first step in evaluating evidence. If the evidence is not strong, the overall argument cannot be strong because your position will be built on weak evidence. Once you determine that the evidence is strong, look at the claim. Strong evidence can be used to support an overstated or weak claim. You also need to consider the connection between the evidence and the claim, and between the claim and the position. Using this process allows you to dissect and examine evidence and claims that you will use to construct an argument in support of a position, and to make sure that the argument you construct will withstand similar deconstruction. In general, this technique of questioning claims and evidence critically as you read is that basis of all close reading. Specifically, it is the foundation of argument analysis. To start, let's explore how to examine evidence. Examining evidence and claims. Analysis is about asking questions. There are some standard questions that can be asked across text. More specific questions arise as you engage with material. The simple practice of acting as an investigator and asking questions of all the elements of an argument is the best way to begin in an examination. As stated, you first need to identify the elements so that you can ask questions first. This figure shows a breakdown of the flow of research, starting with position statement, going into reasoning for support, which leads into claim statements. And then under those claim statements, you have more reasoning for support and evidence. And keep in mind there can be multiple claim statements for each position statement and multiple reasonings for support as well. Strong arguments don't make you work hard to locate or understand the position, claims, and evidence, and they state the reasons that connect each explicitly. As you unpeel the layers of the argument, ask questions with each step. Thinking through an example can help us see how questioning claims and evidence can work in practice. Perhaps a drug company tested a new medicine for the seasonal flu and found that it worked well and had low risk. If a statement claimed that, based on that evidence, everybody should take the drug annually to prevent the flu, we would want to analyze the evidence to understand the claim. To start, we can look at exactly what the test tested and what the results showed and suggested in order to determine whether the evidence supported the stated claim. This is analysis. Without questioning the evidence, we cannot know if it is strong. An important part of questioning the evidence is examining the context and investigating the process used to gather the evidence. In response to the claim about the flu medicine, we'd start by investigating the test and reviewing the scope and scale and strength of the clinical trial. How strong was the research design? Double-blind, random, control group, length of trial? What was the population size, the sample size, the confidence level, and the margin of error? And who were the subjects? Variety across sex, gender, age, race, ability, SES, social economic status? How many times was the result replicated? And how many times was a study run? Were there 20 rounds of testing and only one that found these results? Who were the researchers? And who sponsored and funded the research? Did they correct for oversights or outliers in the research and establish causal connections, meaning that one event impacted another in a cause and effect relationship instead of a correlation that simply indicates both happened without causality? Detailed analysis is not necessary for our evaluation, but you will want to consider general questions concerning how the evidence was gathered and what was done and with the results. Learning what to look for when you question evidence also informs decisions about what to do and not do when you are designing a study and what to look for when you select evidence to support a claim and position. In addition to these considerations, many more questions can be tailored to analyze evidence, depending on the evidence and context. Because there is such a wide range of source material you will be examining throughout and beyond your formal education, there is no single or simple way to question evidence. The goal is simply to look closely at the quality of the evidence and understand precisely what the results say, so you can determine what they do and do not support in a stated claim. In general, approaches to dissecting arguments through close reading and critical thinking will always apply. In addition to questioning the evidence, we would question the claim that everybody should take the drug every year to prevent the flu. The first step in analyzing the claim is simply to identify the different parts of the claim. The claim is that 1, everybody should take the drug, 2, every year, 3, to prevent the flu. To start, we looked at the research design of the evidence that grounds the claim. So let's assume that we found that the research design used in the clinical trial that tested the new flu drug was flawless, and the findings were replicated, which would validate the underlying assumption that the drug worked well. Next, we would need to look at the different parts of the claim. The claim's first assertion is that everybody should take the drug. Absolute terms like everyone, always, and never should draw your attention. A claim with absolute language requires more contextualization, but any generalizations and extrapolations deserve attention. Perhaps when we look closely at the research, we found that some populations saw better results than others, and that some populations were at greater risk if they did get the flu. What if we also found that there was a limited supply of the medicine and that it was costly? Placing the findings in context by adding considerations of cost and risks might allow us to consider whether people most at risk of getting the flu, spreading the flu, or dying from the flu should be the focus, and that suggesting everyone take the drug is an overgeneralization. Overstating a claim makes it easy to dismiss, which can result in being discredited by your audience and losing the opportunity to make progress on a more responsible request or claim. In this case, trying to convince your audience of a target audience instead of saying all would have made the claim far stronger. And regardless of the claim, more and better evidence is more convincing. We would also look closely at the suggestion within the claim that the drug be taken every year. We'd already noted the use of every in the first aspect of the claim and problematized other elements of the claim. This part might already be suspect. Nonetheless, we would look to the results to see if the research findings were extended enough to determine that once a year is the right amount and that every year is necessary. Perhaps close reading of the results would support an annual dose, even though the target population was overstated. But if there isn't support for the claim that the drug be taken every year, that weakness in the statement should be noted and perhaps even corrected with the appropriate cycle. For a deeper analysis, you could look specifically at the data being used to support the claim. You could even modify it by looking individually at the optimum results for what you identified as the ideal target group. Perhaps you'd find that the at-risk group you identified as the target audience actually benefited most from a twice-yearly dose of the medicine instead of the annual finding determined when applied to the larger group of subjects. Our goal is not to analyze the content to that extent, but be aware of all the layers. Being aware of all the layers helps inform the questions you can ask as you deconstruct and analyze the elements of any text. In this case, you could simply ask the question of whether the raw data was included in the findings being offered in support of the claim. The fact that the evidence was cited but not included doesn't innately discredit the finding, but it is an omission you can highlight. Finally, the claim suggested that the drug be used to prevent the flu, so we would start by asking if the test looked at preventing the flu or if it just looked at whether the medicine decreased the number of days people with the flu displayed symptoms, or the severity of the symptoms. Using terms that don't mean what you meant to mean can be an oversight or an intentional attempt to mislead, but in either case, it discredits the argument and the author. Clarifying the terms medicine and vaccine here is a necessary part of our analysis. Prevention is far different than treatment, so clarifying the terms used in the stated claim is important. Defining terms for ourselves and our audience is a requirement for providing vital context to frame and ground our overall argument. The elements we know to include in our presentation and paper are also the elements we want to question in the sources we encounter and use in the presentations and papers of our peers. Thinking through this example demonstrated that breaking the evidence and claim into pieces and asking clarifying questions can produce valuable analysis, and learning more about specific techniques, approaches, and methods, and the theories and methodologies that inform and undergird them can advance your analysis of arguments and other genres in text. As we look at the connection between the claim and the evidence in our example, we will start to explore specific methods. By looking closely and asking questions, we found that the claim included overstatements that made it easy to discredit, which is not uncommon. Summaries or reviews included in popular works don't always summarize the findings correctly, and we can easily make similar errors in our own work. Think of the research papers you've written over the years. Have you always read all the sources you cite carefully? Or have you occasionally skimmed an abstract and cited a source in support of a statement without being sure that what you stated was thoroughly supported by the source? Taking the time and putting in the effort to engage source material thoroughly and integrate it as evidence intentionally in order to provide strong support for a claim is what determines the strength of any argument. And all those strong sources need to be integrated with clear connections that explain the reason for support. Examining connections. Dissecting a claim in the evidence and analyzing each individually is important because strong evidence can be used to support a weak claim. Or some of the evidence supporting the claim could be strong, while other parts are weak. And if weak evidence supports a strong claim, the overall argument is still weak because the position is not supported by strong evidence. But there is another important element to analyze. In addition to the evidence and the claim, the connection that links the two to each other and to the position must be questioned and analyzed. Strong evidence and a strong claim have to be connected in a reasonable and relevant relationship, ideally causal instead of corollary. Even more than classical logic, which can be granular, ancient logic, in particular Aristotelian notions around syllogisms, justification, proofs, and premises, frame formal understandings of argument and reasoning. As part of larger conversations related to rationalism and empiricism, Informal logic and defensible reasoning, understanding advanced concepts can support academic discussions on reasoning. In fact, there are entire fields dedicated to reasoning as it relates to logic, as well as reasoning in mathematics, reasoning in neurophysiology, ethical or moral reasoning, legal reasoning, and the psychology of reasoning. And those only deal with human reasoning. And perhaps the most well-known theories and practices are induction and deduction. So while our goal cannot be to engage any of those concepts in earnest, we cannot overlook the basic concept and the important role that reason plays in writing and reading arguments. Our goal in relation to the role of reasoning is particularly practical. When we discuss the reasoning used to connect evidence and claims in support of a position, our practical litmus test is that the reasons withstand scrutiny and analysis as part of the larger debate. In other words, the connection should be stated explicitly in terms that are clear and make sense to the audience. In practice, this does not mean any connection can be stated and that no matter how thin it will be accepted or can be defended by stubborn insistence, increased volume, or indignation. Instead, we reference the active engagement of the term reasonable as a pragmatic practice related to the application of the term beyond argumentation through concept and practices such as reasonable persons, reasonable doubt, reasonable accommodations, and even reasonable price. Reasoning, realistically, cannot be reserved for practice as part of formal logic. And current conversations around reason and argumentation have disrupted what were once standard notions. As a result, defining reasonable in relation to audience is an analysis is a practical approach for general conversations around argumentation within and beyond the academy. In our presentations and papers, the goal of considering reasoning and the connections between claims and evidence is so that assumptions and errors that weaken arguments can be identified or avoided. Let's look at an example related to our topic to see how to question the connections. Perhaps your position is that the state of Florida should not decrease the funding for USF, and one claim you offer in support of your position is that the funding was previously cut, which you provide strong evidence to prove. The simple fact that funding was cut isn't a reason to sustain it, so your evidence is credible, but the claim is not relevant to the position. Even though the evidence supports the claim, your claim doesn't support your position. But recognizing the weakness in the connection between the claim and the position doesn't disprove the position simply because it doesn't prove it. Identifying a weak connection between a position and the claim, or between the claim and the evidence intended to support it, only tells us that the connection between the two isn't strong and does not tell us anything about the position, claim, or evidence, which have to be evaluated individually. Let's look at two quotes from our sample in USF among top Florida institutions in key performance areas. The following statement is a potentially relevant piece of information for our question. Quoted, as a preeminent research university, the University of South Florida is proud of the role we play in fueling the state's continued economic growth and prosperity, said USF President Judy Genshaft. End quote. In-text citation, paragraph 2. Here's another quote from the article. Our leadership in student success ensures that our students graduate with the skills and experiences they need for productive careers, which in turn provides Florida with a strong talent pipeline that has an impact for generations to come. End quote. In-text citation, paragraph 2. Now let's look at each closely and in relation to our argument. While the context in the article was useful and may make it to the final cut of the presentation, can these statements work as evidence or claims in support of our position? The quote states that USF fuels Florida's economy and that USF alumni provide a pool of strong workers, but we cannot cite that as a reason to sustain funding because we have no evidence to suggest that decreasing funding will impact that outcome. So the connection between the claim and our position would be thin and tenuous at best. We don't know if decreasing funding will have a negative effect on those positive outcomes, or if sustaining or even increasing funding will maintain the value or have any impact at all. Perhaps the information could be combined with other points of evidence to support the claim that decreasing funding would decrease the positive impact USF has on the economy, which would be strong evidence in support of the position to sustain funding. But without other evidence combined with this evidence to create a stronger claim, this statement as a claim is not strongly connected to our position. The strength of the claim cannot be divorced from the position it is being used to support. What if you found another source that said USF planned to invest current funds in developing the existing academic programs related to fields most in need in Florida and creating new programs in areas of high need? Or what if you found an article that claimed that decreasing investments in public universities was correlated with decreased economic impacts? While the general claim isn't related to Florida, and the claim that USF impacts the state economy isn't related to the position that funding should be sustained, taken together, the two create a strong claim in support of the position that Florida should sustain funding for USF. If additional research helped you support the claim that the economic impact resulting from the current investment would likely be large enough to offset the spending, you could even say that the funding would more than pay for itself, making the claim more convincing for anyone who does not support your argument to sustain the funding on the basis that they think it would be a waste of money or that the state simply doesn't have enough money. A strong connection is a connection in which the evidence is translated to be an appropriate claim. Overstating or misstating what the evidence says in one way to create a weak connection is one way to create a weak connection. If it is a corollary and the claim identifies it as a corollary connection, it is fine. If it is a corollary and the claim suggests that it is a causal, it isn't fine. The connection then is really about making sure that what the claim says is supported by evidence. Think of our drug example. The disconnect was that the evidence didn't support the claim, so when we asked the questions of the evidence and found that it didn't match, the problem wasn't the research, but the stated claim. If the claim had clearly stated what the evidence found, the evidence would have supported the claim. So even if we found that the research design only included asking one person what she thought, if the claim stated that, the connection would be fine. We would take a closer look at deconstructing arguments when we discuss opposition and refutation. For now, our goal is to read articles related to our topic in order to practice these concepts in direct relation to our presentation and the paper preparation. Arguments and action. For 3.2, you will read and annotate or outline two articles related to our question. Read both articles closely and critically to identify a main position and claims and evidence in support of the main position. Each member of your group should read a different article from the list. Below is a list of about 12 articles that you can choose from. These are popular public articles and not academic articles, but they are more comprehensive and take a closer look at our topic than our prior sample texts. Read them for the context so you can develop an understanding of our topic, but also read them to practice close reading and annotating and in preparation for the group presentation and position paper. For your second article, you can use one of the articles previously engaged for context, an article on this list that wasn't covered by a peer in your group, or a new article you located and selected. The second article should be explicitly connected to your position. As always, work as a group to discuss how to select the best sources to contribute to the overall goal of constructing the presentation, and consider how the article you select can work for your paper as well. For both articles, complete and submit the following. Format the source according to a style and link to the text. State the main position in a complete sentence with a formatted quote or paraphrase and a signal phrase and citation. List any claims and/or evidence offered in support of the position. State any acknowledged oppositional positions or claims and any included refutation. Explain how the position in the article relates to the claim or position from our topic. Quote one piece of information from the article and explain how it could be used as context in your presentation or as evidence to support a claim. Include the claim and your position. In addition to uploading your responses to Canvas, include the content in the group grid and bib and any other space where your group collaborates in preparation for the presentation packet. Also, add your content to your personal bib and grid for your own personal packet. Assignment 3.2. For 2 articles, one from the list provided in 3.2 and one of your choice, complete the following. Number 1, format the source according to a style and link to the text. State the main position in a complete sentence with a formatted quote or paraphrase and a signal phrase and citation. Number 3, list any claims and/or evidence offered in support of the position. Number 4, state any acknowledged oppositional positions or claims and any included refutation. Number 5, explain how the position in the article relates to a claim or position from our topic. Number 6, quote one piece of information from the article and explain how it could be used as context in your presentation or as evidence to support a claim. Include the claim and your position. Respond to 1 through 6 for your first article and then respond to 1 through 6 for your second article.